This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about some ways to keep the pH down in a saltwater pool. Of course, one of the drawbacks of a saltwater pool is that the pH will rise a lot more rapidly than in a standard, say, trichlor pool or a pool that you're using an alternate sanitizer in. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. One reason that you're going to see a dramatic increase in the pH, and I did mention a trichlor pool, which means this is the pool we're using 3-inch trichlor tablets in. The pH tends to be pretty stable in a trichlor pool because the tablets themselves are very acidic, somewhere around 2 or 3 pH, and this keeps the pH lower. Hence, trichlor has cyanuric acid in it. It's an acid, and this will, of course, keep the pH lower in pools. That's why if you have a fiberglass or vinyl pool and you're using trichlor tablets in it, the pH tends to drop down to dangerous levels because the surface type of those pools don't have much of an acid demand, and compared to a cement pool or pebble tech pool. The reason I bring this up is most people that are using trichlor tablets are the ones that will switch to a saltwater pool. Granted, there's a lot of new builds where the customer is getting just a saltwater system where they haven't had any alternate sanitizer in the pool before, but a lot of people are coming from a trichlor pool, as I call them, because they're using trichlor tablets, to a saltwater pool, and they're going to notice this difference much more dramatically than if you've never had that kind of conversion before. With that said, it's good to know why the pH is rising in a saltwater pool. It's not going to solve the problem knowing why, but knowing the why will give you an idea of some solutions in a way. So the why is, it's just basically the electrolysis process of the saltwater system. It generates sodium hydroxide, which raises the pH in the pool. Also, there's a lot of aeration going on because if you have ever seen the saltwater production, there's bubbles in there and there's a lot of turbulence in there, and there's a lot of heat in there as well. All of this will lead to the pH rising in a saltwater pool. You're not using a particular sanitizer that kind of keeps the pH low, like trichlor, and this is the effect you're going to have with the saltwater generator. So kind of knowing the reason why, there are some solutions right away that can help mitigate this. The first solution, and the one I think that is overall the most successful, is to reduce the cause of the high pH, which is the saltwater generator operating. Now, logically, you can't turn it off because then it's not gonna produce chlorine for the pool. But in some cases, in a lot of cases, you can dial the saltwater generator back to a point. Most of them, you can do increments of 10%. Some you can do increments of 1% production. So basically, how the saltwater generator regulates production is if you have a saltwater generator set at 50%, let's just say you have a Pentair iChlor 20 or 40 at your pool, and you're running it at 100%. But let's say you just dial that down to 50%. What this actually means is that saltwater cell or generator will only be active half the time that it's operating. So if your pool's running for an hour, let's say, just to keep it simple, during the half an hour period that the pool is running, the saltwater generator is not producing chlorine, thereby reducing the symptoms of what the saltwater generator does by 50%. So if you're running the saltwater generator less, it's going to allow some of these symptoms to kind of go away because you're not at 100% output. Now, there's a few ways to achieve this. I think having the cyanuric acid in a saltwater pool at 80 to 100 parts per million is one way to achieve this, because the higher cyanuric acid level means that the chlorine that's being produced by a saltwater generator is protected in the pool better. This is above the range that's recommended, the 30 to 50 parts per million. And there's a few reasons why 80 parts per million, even though 100 parts per million, is more effective. One, Bob Lowry had stated in podcasts before that one reason for the higher level is that all the chlorine is coming out of the return jets in a concentrated area of the pool, like you pouring a gallon of liquid chlorine in one spot in the pool, basically. That's kind of the effect of how the salt water is introduced to a pool, and the sun's UV rays will destroy a high concentration of chlorine unless the cyanuric acid level is higher. Another reason why you want to keep it higher, in my opinion, is that you can have the salt at a lower production, and it'll protect the chlorine in the pool. It'll protect more chlorine in the pool. For every part per million of cyanuric acid is basically protection for part per million of chlorine. Basically, if your cyanuric acid level is 50 parts per million and your chlorine level is at 8 parts per million, only 5 parts per million is theoretically being protected. It's not really cut and dry like that, but that's kind of like the theory and kind of what you're basing it on. So if you wanted to keep your saltwater pool at 8 parts per million, having 80 parts per million of cyanuric acid would be a level you would want to have in the pool. Now, in some cases, you can't cut production back to a certain level because the pool is just too big and the saltwater generator has to run at a certain output to sanitize that pool or produce enough chlorine in that pool, I should say, over the course of the time that the pump is running. So dialing it back to 50% is not realistic in some cases. In some cases, you can go to 30%. It all depends on the pool and the size of the saltwater generator. Now, I always suggest getting a saltwater generator that's rated for a larger body of water than you actually have. For instance, if you have a 20,000 gallon pool, I wouldn't recommend getting a Pentair IC20, which is rated for 20,000 gallons, because then you're going to have to keep the output near 100% all the time. I would rather you get an IC40, which is rated for 40,000 gallons of water. It produces more chlorine because it has a larger salt cell or more plates in there. And this is something that you may want to consider. Now, as far as longevity of the cell, you may not get double the life by running it at half the output. One thing that I would always say before was, buy a larger salt system or wood rated for a larger pool, because then you can lower the output by 50%, and that salt cell will last a lot longer because some are rated for 10,000 hours of use, some are rated for 15,000. There's a few rated for 20,000 hours of use. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. But I found that these salt cells are not made the way they used to be made. And even if you buy a larger salt cell and you're reducing the output, you may not get an extended life of the salt cell. Things aren't made the way they used to be. If you have an old washer and dryer, you know that they just last forever and work forever. Or an old dishwasher, the new ones break every 3 years now. And the same thing goes with these salt cells. When they first were manufacturing them, they were really robust. I mean, there's some Hayward Arkwright cells that are like 10 years old and still functioning because they made them really well. Now, the plates do wear out over time and over hours of usage, but sometimes poor manufacturing will contribute to an early death of that salt cell, regardless of if the plates still have life in them or not. So this is something to consider, getting a larger salt system, not to save money on salt cell replacements or extend the life of it, but to actually reduce the amount of output so that the pH doesn't rise as rapidly in the pool. If you can reduce the symptoms, or the cause, I should say, by 50%, then the symptoms are going to be reduced by 50% logically. So if you have a pool that the pH is rising rapidly from 7.6 to 8.2 every week, and you have it at 100% output, logically, by reducing that, it may rise from 7.6 to 7.9 during that course of the week, if that makes sense. So just to make it clear, if you get a salt cell rated for 20,000 gallons, it'll produce maybe, 0.8 chlorine or 0.8 pounds of chlorine. If you get one that's rated for 40,000 gallons, it may produce 1.5 pounds of chlorine a day, because the larger salt system, it will produce chlorine at a higher rate than the smaller one, so you can reduce the time it's running, if that makes sense. I just want to clarify that so you understand the theory behind that. Another way you can control the pH in a saltwater pool is with a CO2 system. Now, these are becoming a little more popular. Now, they're not super cost effective for most pool owners, but they do work really well. They introduce CO2 into the water, basically, and this will reduce the pH in a more natural fashion. Circuit Pool makes a total balance one. There's a clear water pH. Penter has an Intella pH pump. So there are several different ones you can choose from. And if you wanted to spend the money to get a CO2 system, you can definitely get one and have it installed in your equipment area. And this is a surefire way to keep the pH from rising. And you can keep it at 7.6 or 7.8 very easily without worrying too much about the salt cell output and all those other factors that I mentioned. Since they work on the principle of injecting carbon dioxide, CO2, into the pool water, this will, of course, lower the pH in the pool effectively. So do your research on that. If you wanted to go that far and bite the bullet on the cost and get the CO2 system, of course you have to refill the CO2 tank when it runs out. This is an effective way, and there's definitely good science behind CO2 and lowering the pH in the pool. Something else you can do is keep your alkalinity, and Terarco says 60 parts per million is the lowest he would go with alkalinity, and I agree that you don't want to go too low with alkalinity because it can have a negative effect on the surface, especially if you have a plaster pool. You can get a lot more, in my opinion, I've seen a lot more modeling of the plaster with really low alkalinity, and at 60 it's pretty much at the lowest level that you need it at. So alkalinity is a buffer for the pH. If you have, for example, alkalinity of 150 and you add a quart of muriatic acid to the pool, what's going to happen is, since the alkalinity is at 150, it's going to make the acid less powerful in the pool, so to speak. If you're using dry acid in the pool, on the label itself, it says that if the alkalinity is above 120, you're going to use a lot more of this product. So lower the alkalinity prior to using the dry acid, because it is less effective. You have to use more of it in the pool. Same with muriatic acid. If the alkalinity is 150 or 160, it's going to buffer that acid and make it less acidic in the water. Now, if the alkalinity is at 60, then, of course, logically, you can conclude that if you add a quart of muriatic acid, it'll be more effective in the pool and drop the pH down more effectively because there's not as much buffer, and therefore the acid has a stronger effect in the pool itself. So lowering the alkalinity is one good way of course, keeping the pH from bouncing from 7.6 to 8.2, 8.4 every week. Now, how do you lower the alkalinity down? Well, you do that with adding muriatic acid to the pool and then running the pool and then checking it again and adding more muriatic acid. And when it gets to 7.2, I would stop. And of course, you can do aeration, which raises the pH without raising the alkalinity. Aeration is really easy to do. You can simply point the return jets upwards, or you can get a submersible pump and shoot the pump at an angle. You just want to find some way to introduce air into the pool, either with the return jet pointed upwards or with a submersible pump, which is probably the best way to do it. Put it on the first step of the pool, have it just shooting the water into the deep end. And you can buy some water features on Amazon too. They connect to threaded return lines, and these are effective ways of aerating a pool as well, getting these aftermarket kind of water features that attach to a return line. Use that to aerate the pool. So it takes about 2 days of kind of working with muriatic acid, and of course the alkalinity drops along with the pH. And so as you're correcting the pH so it doesn't get too corrosive, the reason why you're correcting the pH and you don't want to get below 7.2, because if it gets below 7, in my opinion, it gets into the dangerous territory of causing damage to the equipment and possible metal staining in the pool with the heat exchange being compromised. So you don't want to add a lot of muriatic acid and get it down to like, 6 pH, because then you're going to have potential damage. So try to keep it around 7.2 at the lowest. And each time you get to that point, aerate the pool to raise the pH up. Now you can also add 20-miltene borax to raise the pH. It doesn't have much effect on the alkalinity in the pool. So this is another method you can do if you don't want to do the aeration method. Go to Walmart or Target and buy 5 or 6 boxes of 20-miltene borax. Lower the pH down to 7.2. Add some 20-miltene borax to raise up the pH, and then do the same process again. Some people actually add the 20-miltene borax first, and then they add the acid after, and they find this is pretty effective. So the pH, the alkalinity, I should say, is dropping from 150 to 130 to 120 to 100 to 80. When you get it to 60, you can stop this process. And then, if you're using the 20-miltene borax, you're actually adding some borates to the pool already. But one thing you can do at this point, when the alkalinity is at 60 and the pH is at 7.6, go ahead and add some boric acid powder. Now, you can get it sometimes at a local supplier. I get mine at dudadiesel.com. You go there and you order a 50-pound bucket or 55-pound bucket. They'll FedEx it to you. And then you'll add the borates to the pool to a 50 parts per million level. How do you get to that level? Well, you can do it mathematically. If you go to this site here, and this is also a good site to use if you're using 20-miltene borax to raise the pH. The easiest way to get to this calculator is to go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Scroll down to the middle of my webpage, and you'll see Pool and Spa Maintenance Made Easy. Right next to the Orenda app link, you just click on that. That'll take you to the poolcalculator.com, and the poolcalculator.com has a borate section. So you just put in your pool gallons at the top. Then it'll tell you how much boric acid to add to the pool to get to 50 parts per million. If you're using borax to raise the pH, it'll also tell you how much borax to add. So for instance, if the pH is at 7.0 and you want to raise it to 8.0 because you're doing this treatment where you're lowering the alkalinity down and you want to raise the pH back up, it says that if you have a 10,000 gallon pool and the pH gets to 7, and you want to raise it back to 8 with 20-miltene borax, you have to add 4 pounds to the pool to raise it up to from 7 to 8.0. So it's really nice to have this app, or you can use it on your desktop. It's called poolcalculator.com, and it'll tell you how much borax to add to counter the lowering of the pH in the pool. And then if you scroll down to the purple tab, it'll show you how much borates to add to the pool to get to 50 parts per million. For example, if I wanted to get to 50 parts per million here, and I'm using boric acid, which I recommend, then you have to add 18 pounds of it to the pool in 10,000 gallons to get it to 50 parts per million. Now, why add borates to the pool? Borates are actually another pH buffer. So you have alkalinity, you have cyanuric acid in some respects as a pH buffer, and then borates will be another pH buffer. What this means is that the pH won't rise as rapidly, nor will it drop as rapidly as well. So just be aware of the fact that you'll need more muriatic acid in a lot of cases to lower the pH down after doing this. If you have the alkalinity at 70, you have the borates at 50 parts per million, and you have the salt cell generating at 50% output, I can almost guarantee that if it's not a new pool service, like a new plaster pool, you're going to be able to control that pH. If you get it down to 7.6, I can almost guarantee that within a week, it's not going to rise to 8.0. As long as you don't have a lot of water features running in that pool, it's going to make the pH much more stable in the pool. It's a really easy formula. Lower the alkalinity down. Actually, I'll start with lowering the output down to as low as you can lower it and still produce a good chlorine level. 50% is probably your goal. Then you want to lower the alkalinity down to 60 to 80 parts per million. And then you want to add borates to 50 parts per million. And then you really aren't going to have much of a problem in that pool with the pH rising rapidly. Getting to those parameters is the hardest part of this whole thing, especially if the alkalinity is at 160 or 170 or 180. I've had pools, saltwater pools before where I've taken over and the alkalinity was at like 180. And so it did take a lot of work to drop it down. And by the way, if you are using borax, 20 milliton borax to raise the pH while you're doing this process, make sure you're using the calculator as well for borates. So if you're using borax there to lower the pH and you've already added, let's say, 20 pounds of it to the pool, you want to make sure that you factor that in if you're going to switch over to boric acid powder, because in a 10,000 gallon pool, to get the borate level to 50 parts per million, using borax would take about 28 pounds. So if you already added 20 pounds of it, you just need 2 more boxes basically of the 20 milliton borax to bring it to 50 parts per million. And that's why I really like using borax to raise the pH rather than aeration, because then you're adding borates to the pool at the same time and you're saving money because basically you don't have to add the boric acid powder to the pool. Another nice thing about borates, they don't evaporate out of the pool, so you have to just do a recharge later. How to test for borates? They have test strips available on Amazon. Just get the test strip so you can check the borate level of the pool. But usually it's a mathematical formula. If you know the size of your pool, you can go to the poolcalculator.com and there's 3 different tabs there: borax, boric acid, and tetraborate pentahydrate. I don't use that. I use boric acid or borax. And this is a great way, again, to get to those parameters to where the pHs are going to be rising rapidly in the pool and counter that. And this is something that you're going to run into with a saltwater generator out on your pool route or as a homeowner. And this is the way that I do it to counter it. It's a really effective method, and it's something that you can do pretty easily if you apply yourself to do it. Looking for other podcasts, you can find those by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Every Monday through Friday, I drop a new podcast there. And going to my website again, swimmingpoollearning.com, on the top is the podcast icon. Click on that, and there'll be a drop-down menu of 1,700 podcasts there for you as well. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a good rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.